We're going to be talking about what they're teaching kids these days, which is going to be a comparison of security accreditation and designations to kind of what the industry actually needs. So to start this off, let me first introduce myself. My name is Chaim Sanders, and my cohort, the sexy, beautiful, and always ever-present Rob Olson, is to my right over here. As we kind of keep going forward, why are we capable of talking about this? This is the question that you guys should always be asking of any speaker who gets up on a stage, particularly a black hat. What are your accreditations? What are your credentials? And so in this particular space, prior to just about right now, we're both serving as professors, full-time professors at the Rochester Institute of Technology, which is up in Rochester, New York, also known as where they just got Uber. And so as we keep going forward, we're both members of the CSEC Curriculum Committee, which was designed to help come up with ideas of where the curriculum is currently lacking and where it needs to be going in order to be in line with accreditations that might be coming down the line or technologies that might be coming down the line. And as a result of this, we started coming up with kind of an overview of what was happening within accreditation and designation in academia as a whole, particularly with relationships to computing security. Now, while we were both formerly at RIT, currently I've switched off and I've moved on to a company called ZeroFox. So if you're interested in that, I invite you to check that out downstairs. Additionally, the views expressed in this presentation will be, firmly speaking, just Rob and my own. We don't represent any companies, we don't represent RIT or ACM or any other three-letter designation or government agency that we might talk about right now. With that in mind, we needed to ask a couple questions going forward, right? Any good presentation has some thesis topics and questions. So the first was essentially, what are universities even doing with these computing security business? What do they teach? How do they decide what to teach? Where do they cover it? And are there other outside bodies that are guiding this going forward? And so we're going to try and answer all that momentarily. The more important topic for many of you is, well, now that I know what they're doing, and we'll get to that in a couple seconds, how does this map to the job functions that I have available? Granted, many of you might not be hiring at all times, but you certainly have to hire at least some people who come out of curriculum, or academia, I should say. So what is the mapping, and how does this work in my hiring process?
And this is not at all obvious.
Thank you, Rob. So as we go forward, we have to answer the first most obvious question. Does academia even matter, right? This is so obvious that people don't even address the concern, but it bears addressing. They'll say, oh, there's like 8 million jobs when you leave school. It's going to be great for you. It's going to be awesome. And everyone's like, yeah, it's fantastic. So what data do we have to back that up, right? That's clearly the academic in me asking that question. So the first and only thing that we really have from a legitimate source is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which says that there are currently 80,000 information security analyst positions in the United States that are filled. Think about that for a second. That should probably not seem right, because if there are 80,000, there are about 20,000 security folks right here this weekend. That means that 1 in 4 people who are working in information security are here at Black Hat and DEF CON. That's not right. That's completely wrong. So are there other numbers? Oh, well, yeah, there are. There are plenty of numbers. The problem is that they vary a lot. So we can see the lowball estimates come from CyberSeek with 780,000 current jobs being employed, current security professionals being employed. And the high-end numbers come from Frost & Sullivan with nearly 1.7 million. Now, this is more than a 100% difference, and that's plus or minus 1 million, which in all of the security jobs that you've been in, you've all said, like, that's completely unacceptable. I would never take that tolerance of any sort of risk. So how do we work with that? How do we know how many students we need versus want versus have? This is too confusing. We're going to end up taking the lowball numbers, because if we take a good conservative estimate, hopefully we'll be able to come up with a good conclusion. But we don't have the other part of the equation. And the other part of the equation is, well, how many students are there? And what are good schools? Well, here too, even though you might expect that there's a great amount of information, it turns out nobody's sharing any of the information. So I've listed some upper echelon schools, and you might ask, what are the evaluation criteria that you've set forth for these? This is all just opinion. There's literally no actual backing to any of this, and anything that you read online that says these are the top 10 schools that your kids needs to go to, They don't have any backing either. We're going to try and shed some light on where the actual security fits into these schools and how you might be able to determine various other things based on the accreditations and designations they receive. But here we just kind of pick things out of people who did well at CCDC, which isn't particularly very reflective, or people who have known to produce relatively effective security as analysts. So the answer of the question of the numbers. Well, it turns out that RIT, just like every other school, doesn't want to give their numbers away. That's kind of the difficulties in dealing with academia. And so we can give you rough estimates, even though we have the exact estimates, and these aren't that bad. So there are about 120 new students per year at RIT, and about 90 of them graduate, or about 3/4 will graduate every year. That's pretty good, but very high for most computing security programs. I think many of you who are in academia will agree. That's great. If we can say that we have this humongously high average, then we can come up with a really conservative estimate for the amount of students that are going to be needed versus the amount of job positions we have open. And that's exactly what we're going to be able to do right here. So this becomes pretty interesting. How many students are coming out of academia versus how many do we need? Well, first we're going to take that number that we just generated and say that there are about 3/4 of all students graduate. That seems pretty high, given dropouts and major switching and things like that, but it turns out that that's what the data says from the data that we have. There are about 137 four-year schools that are teaching computing security right now, and this number is generated based off of the NSA's CAE designation that we'll be talking about more. So there's plus or minus a couple there, but you'll see that based on the assumption we're making, we're going to take the fact that all of these schools have 90 students. That's totally not true. This is going to give us a very high and diluted average, but it's going to be nice because in this unrealistic average, we get that there are 12,330 computing security students graduating per year. Yeah, that sounds great. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of people.
Nope.
How many people do we need? Well, it turns out if we take even the lowest average there, which is the 1.12 million, that's total jobs that are already filled and needed from CyberSeek, and divide that over the amount of years that most people work, which is about 40, we end up needing about 28,000 students per year to come out. That's double. That's more than double, actually, what the unrealistic average that we generated here already for the amount of students we're producing. So if this doesn't give you kind of a good understanding of where the problem is and why we really need to understand the academia, the academic environment that we're putting forth, I don't know what will. Now, based on the amount of people who are here, I'll tell you that this is not a very sexy topic. People don't like to hear about academics and accreditations and designations, but it's very interesting data once you know it. It's kind of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so let's talk about how curriculum actually comes about, how the sausage is made, so to speak. So security typically fits into one of three places in higher education: computer science, information technology, or information systems. So how do schools come up with the curriculums for these fields? Well, ACM, that's the Association for Computing Machinery, pushes down curriculum guidelines or curriculum recommendations. Nobody has to do these. All right, there's no tangible benefit to doing these. This is just what ACM thinks is a good idea. ABET is an accrediting body that takes those recommendations and, largely speaking, takes those recommendations and translates them into something that a school has to do if they want to be considered ABET accredited. Now, ABET is currently the only player in this space for accreditation. NSA kind of plays in the space a little bit with their CAE designations, which are a little bit different from a higher education perspective. A designation is not the same thing as accreditation, but that's a separate discussion. There's also some upcoming solutions as well. ACM is developing a new cybersecurity education standard that ABET is going to take and translate into an accreditation in the very near future. This process being called CSEC 2017, which we're going to talk about at length. So let's start digging into what a computer science curriculum looks like in relation to security. Okay? Oh, got this the other way. So what we have here is a breakdown of what the ACM recommends a computer science program looks like. We have all the major knowledge units that we often see in a computer science curriculum, and we've got this broken down in two ways. Tier 1 credit hour, or Tier 1 instructional hours, which are the number of hours a student actually has to be in a classroom with a professor or lab, We also have Tier 2 instructional hours, which is a suggested number of additional hours. ACM doesn't say how many of these Tier 2 hours a program has to put in. Just it's some reasonably high number. So if we look at where security falls in this, we have 3 required instructional hours. What that translates to is 1 week of required security education for a prospective developer, with an additional 6 instructional hours, which will give a potential developer everything they need to know about security. Let's pause and think about that. 1 to 3 weeks of security education in a programmer's undergraduate degree. That's not a lot. There's also some other places where security might end up getting put, operating systems and networking, just because the amount of people in higher ed that really grok security, if you will, is fairly low. So people teaching the operating systems and networking courses often get tasked with teaching this as well. So if we delve into those 3 to 6 instructional hours, this is what we get. We have 3 Tier 1 hours covering things like secure design. So let's take that for just a second. 1 instructional hour, maybe 2, on secure design for a developer, and that's it. 1 to 2 lectures. My personal favorite on this is 1 optional hour on crypto for a developer. That's 1 lecture that will give a developer everything they need to know about crypto to go out into the workforce. That seems crazy to me. Now, oftentimes this kind of breakdown gets translated into an elective class at many universities. So we have here the number of instructional hours in the ACM suggested elective course. This is an actual exemplar course. I can't remember what school offers this. But it's not bad, right? It's largely focused on application security and network security. But overall, it seems reasonably good. But it's an elective. Okay? Very rarely do students in computer science actually have to take this elective. Yeah, I agree with that laughter. If we look at information technology, it's a little bit different. Information technology for ACM, they don't break it down into suggested hours and recommended hours. They just have overall hours. And here, information assurance and security is ranked fairly high at 23 instructional hours, or about half a semester if you're a professor. Again, that's reasonable, certainly compared to computer science. It's ranked fairly high as well at 5th, and on par with integrative technology and social and professional issues. So IT undergraduate education seems to be doing a much better job at covering security, at least based on the curriculum recommendations. Information systems programs, which are largely less technical, they don't break it down by instructional hour, rather they break it down by course. So what we have here are the courses where there is a non-trivial amount of cybersecurity. And what we see here is that there actually is, within the non-technical education, a fair amount of reinforcement going on in cybersecurity. Many courses in an IS degree hit this topic pretty hard, and we actually have 2 different electives, IT Audit and Controls and IT Security and Risk Management, specifically addressing this topic. When we dig into those, they're actually not bad electives. Now, it doesn't break this down in instructional hours as we saw with computer science, but again, this is actually not bad. It's not going to produce anyone who's going to go off and be a red teamer, but if we have someone who's going to go work in security management, who's going to work in compliance, going to work in auditing, okay, this is a pretty reasonable starting point for them, I think. And now we get into ABET, right? So those curriculum guidelines that we just talked about, no one actually has to do those. There's no tangible requirement that anyone go do any of those recommendations we just talked about. However, it's often the case that programs want to be accredited, and for good reason. It's a good marketing tool for them, specifically for parents. So what are the accreditation requirements, and how do they relate to the curriculum requirements, or the curriculum guidelines? Here we have the ABET requirements for computer science. So if a program wants to be ABET accredited, this is the set of courses that they have to offer, the set of content that they have to offer. What they do not have, very clearly, is security. Okay? In order to be accredited in computer science, you do not have to teach security. I think that's exactly how we get bugs, right? Information technology does explicitly call this out. Information technology accreditation explicitly states that we have to have information assurance and security as a core topic. It doesn't specify how much it has to be in there, but at least there's a pretty good focus. It's one of 4 major topics. For information systems, similarly, it's within one of 6 topics, but we do see security of information systems covered as well. This is a requirement in order to be ABET accredited. Okay, so we're in good shape, right? So we have 2 out of the 3 accreditations require security. So that must mean everybody is doing security. Well, when we actually track what people are doing in the real world, we don't look for what they say they're doing, right? We want metrics. And in higher education, we talk about assessing learning outcomes as our metric. So even though information technology and information systems say that they require security content in their security education programs, they don't actually require assessing security learning outcomes. So these programs are supposed to offer security, but do we have any metrics to back that up? Maybe in one case. So we'll start off talking about general and computer science learning outcomes. If we take a look at general, there is security is a general requirement for all ABET accredited programs. But it's lumped in with a bunch of other vaguely non-technical kind of fluffy topics such as professional, ethical, legal, social issues and responsibilities. There's no clear focus on it. If we look at what computer science requires, there's a number of requirements for computer science education, for metrics that have to be gathered, for top things that we have to prove that the program is teaching, but there's no security in those as well. Instead, it's focused on theory, on algorithms, on complexity, all the classic CS problems, not security, which makes sense because CS didn't have to do security, right? IT required security. Now, we have a lot of learning outcomes for IT that have to be measured as well. But at best, the place where we see security kind of shoehorned in here is an understanding of best practices, standards, and their applications, which may include security. I would hope it would include security since it's generally a best practice, but it doesn't have to. This is open to interpretation and could be interpreted in many, many different ways, including not covering security. Similarly, in information systems, we see one very vague learning outcome that has to be measured that does not mention security at all.
Cool. So we've seen some of the requirements that Rob's put forth for how we evaluate and collect information on whether or not these topics are being taught. And we've even seen that some areas don't really require these as part of their knowledge units at all, or if they do, they're very minimal. So fortunately, right, we don't have to worry about security being put into mostly computer science programs, right? Well, it turns out that when we actually collect data on this, and we painstakingly went through and collected data on hundreds of universities that will be made available after this, and determined where their security programs mostly reside, they mostly come out of security. In fact, almost 50% come out of security. Of interest here, there's a couple other ones where we expect to see a lot of IT. We actually don't see that much, and we see a good amount of information systems. One surprising area to us was that we ended up seeing security being put into computer engineering. And we also have started to see a big improving trend where security is pulled out of all of these and put into its own area. There's both positives and negatives to that approach. Now, the one thing I want to talk about before we keep going forward is, of course, that we're going to be using this color scheme for the remainder of the presentation. So just remember that the maroon color is kind of computer science, purple is going to be IS, green is going to be IT, and white is going to be computing security. So keeping this in mind, again, Archer kind of said it right. Do you want bugs? Because this is how you get bugs. All right, so moving forward, we kind of have to evaluate how we actually collected who teaches security. We kind of mentioned this CAE-CD thing earlier in the presentation when I said there were 137 different schools. And it turns out that there's quite a lot of schools who obtain the NSA's CAE certification. And this NSA is the NSA you're thinking about, the National Security Agency, which lives in infamy in many of these circles. But they actually serve as the, rather speaking, designating body of the entire computing security academic environment right now. And we'll see that in a couple seconds. So they offer 3 different designations. The CAE-CD, which is their cyber defense one, and we'll talk about how we've come to the conclusions of each of these, but we believe that it's focused on high-level kind of blue team activities. The CAE-CO, which is the cyber operations one, which definitely seems like it's focused kind of on state-sponsored offense, and again, we'll talk about that. And the CAE-R, which is focused on research. Now, the CAE-R has no academic or curricular requirements beyond that you have some sort of publishing arm and you don't have to be teaching students anything about cybersecurity. So we're not going to really focus on that too much. Of these, it's important to note that 137 have the CAE-CD. Very comparatively few have the CAE-CO. It's also newer. So we'll be talking about how these both look right now. The big thing to remember about these, though, is there's a carrot to this whole situation. There's an enticing situation that the government puts in, and this is a direct quote from their literature. Students attending CAE-CD or CAE-R schools are eligible to apply for scholarships and grants, and this includes faculty as well. So there's some benefit to getting this. In addition to being able to tell mom and dad, oh yes, we have this NSA thing, they also get the benefit of having scholarships and grants. We'll see that that's going to become an issue coming up. Now, when we start talking about how these are structured, we're going to take a look at the NSA CAE-CD first. And this is broken into a couple of different sub-designations. There's a classic 2-year version and a 4-year version. The 4-year version is a superset of the 2-year version, so it has everything that's involved in having the 2-year anyway. So we're going to investigate mostly the 4-year one, but keep in mind that the core knowledge units are going to be in both. Now, the 4-year one is also going to have operational KUs, so let's take a look at what those might look like, at least the core and then the operational. This is pretty straightforward. In the 2-year one, we see a lot of networking, and again, this is required for the 4-year as well. One of the things that we start seeing in 4-year schools, and one way that you will know that the capability to program is somewhere, is that we move from basic scripting capabilities within the 2-year school to programming as a whole, and these are more thorough requirements. So if you're looking for someone to do development as part of their security environment, you probably don't want to stick to the 2-year. You want to go for a 4-year CAE-CD accredited school at minimum. One of the nice things about this is we see that it kind of has representation for all the areas, right? We see a little bit of purple, which again is the information systems. We see some maroon, which is the computer science, and we see green, which is IT. We also see some white, which is CS. So we're going to keep... Yeah, I'm sorry, CS is in CSEC, security. We're going to keep going forward and look at the optional KUs. Now keep in mind that the schools only have to complete some minimum amount of these optional KUs, five optional KUs. And so what we're going to determine is we're going to come to an interesting conclusion in a couple seconds. Now what's nice about this, at least in some respects, is every area of any curricular is covered, any curriculum is covered. So we see computer science has a vast representation, IT and IS and security. And so keeping in mind that you only need 5 of these, what we've come to the conclusion is that you can actually get a school that has a CAE-CD and it could have any type of student that comes out of it. Right? There's no requirement. He could be a completely computing science-focused student, or an information systems-focused student, or someone who just really knows about computing security. This designation seems to have been well designed for multiple different schools to obtain it, which of course makes a lot of sense from the NSA's perspective. What this means is that you're going to need some additional breakdown about where the actual security program lies in order to make a determination about whether or not a school has the right set of requirements for what you're trying to seek as an organization or a business or so on and so forth. Another interesting fact here to remember is that there's also some requirements for CE. So clearly there's going to be some kind of up-and-coming needs for cybersecurity within computing engineering, which I think many of you who have seen all this IoT device talks, this con, can attest to. Now, the CD actually has pretty straightforward learning outcomes, and they're pretty reasonable. If you were expecting students to learn cryptography, you might expect a student to understand and identify a cryptographic system. Likewise, you might be able to expect them to know what strength these cryptographic systems were put on. Obviously, these could be used in many different ways, but these are essentially the metrics that we're going to be evaluating against. Quite a bit stronger than some of the other metrics we saw from ABET. Now let's move on from the CAE-CD, which is widely used, to the CAE-CO, which is newer. And there's going to be some interesting things here to note. First, this is clearly a little bit differently focused. We see a lot of low-level reverse engineering. We see some IT. We see some security as part of the core knowledge units. We also see some things that we probably don't need in a day-to-day job. I don't know how many of you use just war theory or the Geneva Convention in your day-to-day, but this doesn't seem like the normal security analyst role. And in fact, this is at least an assertion in our opinion, the NSA trying to create an accreditation, I should say, a designation, that's catered to their own type of required needs. This is not necessarily the best thing for our environment, particularly industry. You can't necessarily say, hey, I got this person who has this CAE-CD. He knows everything that I need him to know to be a security analyst. And then he comes up and starts talking about the Geneva Convention. You're like, that's awesome.
Another thing real quick. On that previous slide, there was one core knowledge unit that we definitely did not see, right?
Did anyone spot it?
We did not see the NSA requiring ethics.
I'm going to leave that here. Let you guys use that how you will. So there are some optional KUs, and the optional KUs are kind of very specific. There's a color missing from this slide pretty vehemently, and that is there's almost no purple, which is information systems. In fact, we're pretty much going to come to the conclusion that information systems programs need not apply. In fact, you see a lot of engineering focus here, more than you necessarily saw in the optional KUs for any of the other ones. Additionally, you see classic computer science, and you see some computing security within here. It's going to be a pretty big struggle for a lot of programs to get this accreditation. So what do these learning outcomes look like for the CAE-CD, the CAE-CO? Some make a lot of sense. If you're going to teach operating systems and you expect people to really understand what operating systems are and how they work, thorough understanding, theory, implementation, yeah, this makes sense. Okay, that makes some sense. Some get a little bit out there, right? You might not say that everybody who graduates from a particular security program needs to be able to know all about cellular and mobile core end-to-end delivery. Many of you don't know how LTE versus GSM works, and you're perfectly functional within our career field, but it doesn't hurt. And then some of them are just like out there. Some of them are just all over the place. So this is the requirement for learning assembly, which is maybe fine. But how many of you can create a basic telnet program in assembly? Wait for it, without any libraries. And that, in my interpretation of libraries, means that you're not allowed to use device drivers, you're not allowed to use OS libraries. So how many of you can write your own OS and device drivers from scratch in assembly?
Yeah.
Exactly. That screams implant a little bit, right? That screams implant to me, at least, and that's just one person's opinion.
Yeah. So where are things headed, right? ABET is making some revisions. First, to start off with their general revisions, they're actually more or less keeping what they have, where they say the curriculum must cover security. Every ABET accredited program must cover security somewhere in a manner that's somehow appropriate to the discipline. So everybody kind of gets to decide how they're going to do security themselves. Computer science is not adding any security, which isn't a shocker, I think, based on what we've seen so far. They are adding some security-adjacent topics like networking and operating systems to a list of 3 electives where students have to pick 2. So that I think will get students a little bit more security. IT is actually pulling security out as a fundamental topic, which I see some shocked faces in the audience. I agree. IS, also security is being removed as one of those 6 topics from IS. Now, this is probably to make room for the CSEC 2017 curriculum. So ACM is working on a new set of curriculum standards for cybersecurity education. And what they're saying, they're getting input from a lot of different places. They don't have a final version yet. The most recent draft was released around the middle of June, 0.075. And this is going to have some interesting things. We'll do a deep dive into this in a second. ABET is also working on at least one new accreditation for cybersecurity coming out of their Computing Accreditation Committee. There may be another one in the works here too, coming out of the Engineering Accreditation Committee, but there's no public data, or very little public data that we could find about that. What we do see, as far as ABET goes, is that the public data seems to indicate that it's tracking the ACM curriculum that's being developed. Tentatively, it looks like they want to have something finalized by the fall of 2018, with programs getting accredited in security by 2019. So what does this actually look like? Well, if we start breaking down the CSEC 2017 curriculum, we see primary knowledge areas. These are, to put this in the language that we've been using so far, the core knowledge units, data security, software security, etc. So we see about half technical, half non-technical. We also see some cross-cutting concepts that are supposed to be covered in every one of these primary knowledge areas in some way, none of which should be terribly shocking to anybody in this room. Confidentiality, yeah, of course we're going to hit that hard, right? We're going to hit that everywhere possible. Risk, again, something that we're going to talk about everywhere possible. When we start breaking down the actual topics within these knowledge areas, though, we see some interesting stuff. We do see a fair amount of non-technical things, but this actually looks fairly technical. There's a lot in the system security category that looks like tasks that students would have to have hands-on keyboard to perform. We also see some software security, right? So we've got 3 topics within software security. At least fundamental design principles, sure. Practice, okay. Not a lot. Could be better. Some crypto. A lot of non-technical stuff, but I don't think I've ever heard a recruiter say we need less non-technical skills. We need fewer soft skills. Everyone says we need more soft skills, so that's probably a good thing. Now, what this looks like to me, this really looks a lot like a CISP. It looks like higher education is reverse engineering the CISP. That may not be bad, right? The classic criticism of CISP is that there's no practical hands-on experience required. If we take the CISP CVK and spread it out over 4 years with hands-on experience, I think that kind of addresses the main criticism. So maybe that's not such a bad thing. Now, this is the 0.5 version released in April. The 0.75 version is a little different. So based on feedback that the committee developing this got, they completely scrapped the system security category, saying that we need to revise this. And what they instead did is they took some of that and put it elsewhere. So a lot of the things that were previously in system security moved over into data security. What we see is less software security, which, as being someone interested in AppSec, kind of concerns me. We see a little bit more building on the non-technical stuff, the soft skills. Where this really gets interesting, though, is when we start delving into some of the subtopics of the 0.75 version. So in addition to adding more into organizational security and more into societal security, the 0.75 version also seems to have a heavy emphasis on cyber warfare compared to the previous version. So we see a number of subtopics within these soft skills categories. Military versus civilian cyber law. That's something I definitely need every day as a security analyst, right? Just war theory, cyber war strategy. Military operations. So cyberspace operations specifically points out military operations as a policy subtopic that students need to study. And my personal favorite, the law of armed conflicts. Okay? How many security analysts do you know that in their day-to-day job, outside of government work, need to know the law of armed conflict, right? Despite what many pen testers claim, I think they're not that offensive. I got one laugh. So how do these actually map then?
Yeah, this is a good question. And this is kind of where we take all this data that we had and we try and apply it to positions that individuals might best be suited for outside of school. So based on the ABET computing security curriculum, from a security focus, the individuals that graduate could be, at best, developers, right? With 3 hours of security, I probably wouldn't want to have a security-minded developer coming out of that program. Additionally, in IT, we saw that right now there's quite a bit of information technology security, so they'd probably make a pretty good security-minded network admin. With the information systems one, we start seeing non-technical analyst role come about, and that's a pretty strong spot for them to be in as well. Now, once we start going into the ones that are dedicated towards computing security, we start seeing some interesting results. The first is this ACM 0.5, ACM/ABET 0.5 CSEC 2017 version. This was pretty well suited to make a pretty good general security analyst, and that's why we said it was fairly CSIP-y, if you remember. In the 0.75 version, the newer version, this becomes a non-technical analyst and kind of fulfills the same role as information systems. That seems a little bit redundant to us, but it's something that you might be concerned about as going forward. When we start looking at the NSA accreditations, we start seeing the NSA CAE-CD has generic high-level blue team aspects to it, which is good in some respects. However, there's a huge level of variance that can occur here because there's so many different avenues a school can take in its optional KUs that you really don't know what you're getting. They could be really strong in computing science, they could be extremely strong in information systems, and you just don't know. And the last one, the NSA CAE-CO, seems pretty heavily state-sponsored offense focused. So one of the things that we don't see here is going to be, at least part of our conclusions, is we don't see any kind of offensively focused industrial certifications. So if you're looking to hire pen testers or red teamers, which is a pretty common job for most people who graduate, there's not really a certification that gets you there in any sort of respect. So let's go through some of the other conclusions that we've kind of generated throughout this talk. One, most graduates are going to get their security information from computer science, IT, IS, or CE. This is the vast majority of people, if we remember 75% or thereabouts more. The second one is that currently there are only 3 real accrediting or designating bodies, and that is the NSA, the ACM, and the ABET, and those are the big movers within this environment. And they're addressing future security trends. So it seems like, as we saw, ACM and ABET are kind of taking security out of a number of different areas and trying to put it on its own little plateau. That's a reasonable thing to try and think through, but maybe not necessarily the smartest thing. As we have all been saying for years, we need to bake security in, and that starts at the educational process. Whether or not that actually that message gets transferred through these accreditations, it remains to be seen. Additionally, we're starting to see the introduction of classic kind of CSEC 4-year programs, which may be good, may be bad, remains to be seen also. And one of the kind of interesting things is the ACM right now doesn't necessarily have a strong presence within the space, same as the ABET, I should say. And that leaves the NSA being pretty much the sole designating body of the computing security curriculum environment. That's maybe not the best thing if you're interested in kind of getting general wholesale industrial input into what should and shouldn't be taught. So if you don't think that just war theory is maybe what you need your students who are going into your company to know, then this is probably not the most ideal situation for you. So as we kind of said that most of these are geared towards generic blue teams going forward. We think that's going to still be the case. It's easier for most schools to make the argument that they're going to teach defense instead of offense. However, we do a lot of offense within our industry, so it's something that needs to be addressed. The CAE designation, as we saw, maybe slightly, not necessarily outwardly, but kind of subconsciously influencing the CSEC 2017. And no kind of no accreditation standard really is geared towards industry offense. Now, the most interesting of these is going to be that ABET is going to have a hard time breaking into this field with their new CSEC 2017. And the sole reason for that is what we said earlier. The NSA CAE designations really are a carrot, and they have some goodness that goes with them. They have grants and scholarships associated with them. ABET, on the other hand, has an expensive cost associated with it. You as an institution have to pay, let's say, $20,000 or whatever it might be to get ABET accredited. Even if it's $1,000, that's still more than the NSA CAE-CD that you already have costs, and nobody's asking for designations. I don't know how many of you who, when someone graduated, came to interview with you, were like, hey, do you have an ABET accredited school or no? Because I'm not going to hire non-ABET accredited schools. No one says that. So this is going to be a pretty uphill battle for ABET and any other institution. There are also some general recommendations that need to be considered. We need significantly better metrics. As an industry, this has been something we've been pushing in our own backyards for years, where we've been generating metrics off of SIMs and off of other aspects. Within academia, it's the Wild West for some reason. We have no idea how many people we need or how many people we're generating or what they're learning. We try to at least aid that a little bit with the data that we're making available at the end of this presentation. There should also be kind of more tangible incentives for accreditation beyond just saying like, hey, recruiting's a really powerful tool for you. You can then tell some mother who comes in that you have ABET or ACM or an NSA. Most people don't care about that, so you need a better system in that sense.
I've never had a parent ask me that, ever.
I've had one. And then they said, do you have ABET accreditation? And we said, well, we have NSA accreditation. They were like, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool.
NSA has higher brand name recognition.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. In any event, we also kind of have this industry type of accreditations that are shaping up. So this is going to be kind of an area where we think that most of you should get more involved. If you have feedback, many institutions have industrial advisory boards, and this is a great environment for you guys to get your feedback heard and try and participate in these. So from the academic perspective, since many of you are academics, although not all of you, it should certainly be said that certifications are becoming like the new hotness. And there's a good reason why certifications are becoming the new hotness. The NSA CAE-CD designation now requires that the student actually have a path to be able to take all the required courses. Before they didn't. That might seem weird, but academics. And so as a result, they're making these certifications so that you can kind of take courses from a bunch of different points, a bunch of different areas, and use them. We also see that IT and CSEC are kind of prepared for these new requirements. They can fit all the required CAE-CD areas pretty well. So that's going to be something that I think we'll see more and more is security programs focusing towards IT or pulling out into their own CSEC department. One of the other things that we're seeing that has become very popular is masters. Out of all the institutions that we surveyed, 37% of them had a master's program in information security. And there's a really good reason for that. The first is that it doesn't require a whole lot of accreditation from things like middle states and higher level accreditation boards for the entire university to get. Second, it costs more to take a master's. Third, you can bring people in from any source, computer science, information systems. You can bring them in from jewelry making if you want, and then they get lots of money from this, and it's pretty hot, computing security, as many of you know. The other kind of avenue we're seeing is a lot of people, instead of doing certifications, are doing minors, where they enable people to take minors in computing security in the particular track. So they'll say like, hey, there's a minor in your CS degree for computing security that's CAE-CD accredited. Which is an interesting approach, although not necessarily very helpful to those of you who are hiring. So the NSA CAE-CO is kind of the next area of interest. It's best fit for kind of a CE or CS or CSEC dedicated curriculum. And it's almost never going to fit an IS curriculum. So you almost might as well not even try.
Yeah.
And of course, accrediting bodies should consider adding offense to their defense, because that's going to make it more useful for many of you to understand the quality of the individual that you're hiring and what they're capable of doing. So with that, we have the contact information right there if you're interested. We also have the data. We've been updating this website as we go along. There's still some more to do, but of course it's up and going. It's based on that GitHub, so if you're interested in the raw data, it's available there as well. We have about 7-ish minutes to take questions here. Otherwise, we'll break out to the room that was referenced in the beginning.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Cool.
Question.
We have a question. Can you use the mic? Are there mics set up?
Yeah, I think there's mics set up.
We're getting you your steps in today.
Yeah.
So I teach in one of the master's level programs that you were talking about, and I was just curious if you had any stats on that. Does it kind of mimic what we see in the undergraduate for concentrations, or is it just kind of free for all?
So I think we see, I think we see more often security masters not tied to a security undergraduate. I think that's pretty common. I don't think we've noticed, for example, any particular trend of like a security, or let's say a computer science department offering security masters more frequently than an IT department offering a security masters.
That's absolutely correct. And in fact, we see actually a lot of schools going the route of just having a cybersecurity master's and not tying it to anything in the undergrad. So they can get the NSA CAE-CD and they can say, well, you took that computer science degree and you did a great job, so how about you spend some money and come get the computer security master's? That's a great avenue for marketing.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
that's
not
the program that I work in. So
yeah,
and they have those specialized certifications: cybersecurity of healthcare, cybersecurity of whatever. So cool. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Well, if you have any more questions, feel free to join us afterwards. Otherwise, thank you. We have one more question.
Another one. Yes.
Hi. I was wondering whether you've seen undergraduate minor programs, and also roughly how many courses are usually included in an undergraduate minor or concentration?
So we do see undergraduate minors pretty frequently. 17% of schools have them. I mean, I think that's a reasonable number. As far as the number of, I guess, courses within a minor, typically, from what I've seen previously, around 6 to 8 is a typical minor at most institutions, depending on the number of credits per courses. I don't know that we have any specific data about how many courses a security minor tends to occupy.
On the data that we present, each of the institutions that's listed with a minor comes with the web page where their minor program is described. So that data is available. It's just not correlated.
Yeah, and if you want to generate that data yourself, we would be happy to add it to the repository. Yes.
Hi. As someone who's hired a lot of college graduates and seen them develop as security engineers, analysts, and such. We've had a lot of success hiring computer science graduates and then teaching them security because they have a security team, they work with security mentors. But often we've had a lot of problems with hiring information security or computer security graduates because those courses don't do enough to cover the computer science fundamentals and the security. I mean, we're not going to be teaching them basics of programming, networking, secure, all the other foundations. And I was noticing with some of the computer security accreditations and the focus on foundational computer science seems to be still lacking. Is that a feedback that you get for those computer security courses?
So I think you've got a couple different things in there. Let me start off by saying I agree with you that a good computer science foundation will kind of prepare students to learn security after the fact. But that also puts the onus on industry to teach security rather than higher ed. So I think that's an interesting statement to say that it's industry's job to teach people how to do security. It's not higher ed's job. I think we're taking the look at we're taking the stance that if higher ed wants to assume the responsibility of teaching security, this is kind of what the landscape looks like.
I'd add to that the CAE-CO actually does have a pretty extensive computing science background that's required. So you saw algorithms is in there, you saw operating systems in there, 2 of those and crypto, but 2 of those are very commonly computing science core classes, which is a step in the right direction in my opinion as well. I think we are lacking a lot of skills in the development front from a security perspective, and it's very hard to hire security-minded developers.
Yeah. It's also worth speaking to the point about having to train people coming out with security degrees in computer science fundamentals. There is a wide range of places where security degrees can be housed, right? As we saw with the CAE-CD, that can mean a lot of different things, ranging from the very intense computer science fundamentals to topics like forensic accounting and fraud prevention that are significantly less computer science focused. And all a school has to hit are any 5 of those areas. So that CAE-CD, you really have to dig into what that means a lot. And I think schools are interpreting this in many different ways.
Good question. Thank you. We have one more question over there.
Well, it's more of a comment on his question. I think for most of us to teach a master's in security, that's exactly why we put it in the master's area rather than the undergraduate is. We want them to have the foundation first.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's the case that many master's degrees are kind of retraining, if you will, or maybe not retraining, but a very, very focused specialization, but giving people fundamentals that they could maybe have gotten in their undergraduate degree as well.
Well, thank you. If there are no other questions, that's all. Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right.